The trial play out. Katie Chihansky is with us, former federal prosecutor, constitutional law attorney. Katie, good to see you. Let's start with the opening statements. Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg has said that the case is about, quote, conspiring to corrupt a presidential election and then lying in New York business records to cover it up. He says the payoff to Stormy Daniels was, quote, to hide damaging information from the voting public. What will the defense say, do you think, in its opening arguments?
Well, the key issue here is whether the prosecution can actually prove two layers of specific intent on the part of Donald Trump, which is that he had criminal intent to falsify business records. And that's going to be an issue for them, number one, because of the nature of how he described those payments to his lawyer. And then secondly, that he did so to cover up another crime. And that's where you really have to question whether the prosecution can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that these payments were for the sole purpose of influencing an election and not for any other purpose, even personal purpose, reputational purposes, et cetera. So the defense is going to make it clear that the prosecution has a very high burden here, and they certainly have very unfortunate witnesses on which to rely to reach that burden, Michael Cohen and Stormy Daniels, namely.
Yeah, you talk about Michael Cohen will be the star witness. The former president in the hallway at court said, look, he was relying on his accountants to do this, that he signed these checks. That likely could be his defense. He says he'll testify. We don't know if he will. Is that a reasonable defense, do you think, for him to say, I signed those checks, I thought they were legal expenses, not what the prosecution say to cover up Stormy Daniels?
Absolutely, because when we're talking about criminal intent, we have to look at the mind of the defendant and how he was operating when he made those decisions. So not only does he have his own attorney telling him how to kind of structure these payments, but he has accountants telling him how to do so. And in fact, with regard to the falsified business records, he claimed that these were legal expenses. He's paying his lawyer. I'm not even sure how the prosecution is going to show how that in and of itself is a false statement. And that's just for the misdemeanor charge, which of course they need to prove the elevated felony offense in order to actually get a conviction here.
At the same time, he'll have Michael Cohen on the stand testifying that it was all part of this cover-up scheme, that he took money from his home equity to pay Stormy Daniels, that the Trump organization reimbursed him, and this was all orchestrated by the former president. And he has a tape recording of the former president talking about cash. Do you think that will weigh in with the jury?
Well, it's going to come down to Michael Cohen's claims that Donald Trump essentially directed him to structure it this way. But at the end of the day, Michael Cohen is the licensed attorney, or was the licensed attorney at the time, that was giving advice about how to structure this. And again, hush money payments in and of themselves are not unlawful. The question is whether this was actually a campaign expense that was not reported as such. And that is where you really have to get into the alternate potential motivations for why Trump would pay this money, what he was told, and what advice he was operating under to understand his specific intent. Just because the story was more valuable because Donald Trump was running for office doesn't mean that the payments were made simply to influence the upcoming election. It's kind of a catch-22 that the prosecution is going to have to contend with.
So